but he's fixated on the cake. He says it's a Looney Cake?
I believe when they told Connor his mom was getting,
Going to the funny
taken
farm.
into mental health care, they gave him cake, Dad and whoever, just to calm him down, to have a sugar biting cake. So he was eating Victoria Sponge for like a week straight.
Oh, right. Okay. It's a Looney Cake.
Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Binging with Babish, where this week we're taking a look at Looney Cake from Succession, a never seen but hilariously described Victoria sponge cake, most often served with berries and cream, sort of like an upgraded strawberry shortcake. This is a decidedly English confection, so I'm going to be referring to a recipe by the one and only Mary Berry, starting first with the strawberry jam, beheading and quartering 600 grams of fresh strawberries, and placing into a shallow, wide saucepan along with the juice of 1 lemon, and a positively eye-watering 440 grams of sugar. First, we're just going to give things a sort of cursory mix before allowing to macerate at room temperature for 30 minutes. Then we're bringing this guy up to a simmer and holding him there over low heat for 1 to 1.5 hours, until a sample spoonful of strawberry goo placed on a briefly frozen dinner plate runs knot. Next up, the cake, and Victoria sponge might be the easiest cake in the world. Basically, you're just sifting the dry ingredients, 340 grams of sugar, 340 grams of self-rising flour, a half teaspoon kosher salt, 3 teaspoons baking powder, 6 large eggs at room temperature and shells removed, and 340 grams or 3 sticks of unsalted room temperature butter, with an optional 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. All of this is thrown devil-may-care into the bowl of a stand mixer and paddled lightly until homogeneous. That's it, no pre-mixing, no adding in stages, just dump, mix, and go. Once you've mixed it just enough so that a smooth batter forms and no dry nor wet streaks remain, this stuff's ready to bake. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and engage in some light arts and crafts, heavily lubricating and parchment paper lining 2 10-inch cake pans. Then we're going to evenly divide the batter between the pans. You can do this with a scale, or you can just eyeball it like I'm doing if you want slightly worse results. Smooth things out with a rubber spat, and then channel your inner road rage, violently turning and smacking the cake pan like a hapless steering wheel. Bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 30 minutes until the cakes spring back when poked, allowing to cool completely in the pan. Next and last are whipped style cream, combining about 1.5 cups of heavy cream with about a teaspoon of vanilla paste or a scraped vanilla pod, maybe like 30 to 40 grams of powdered sugar. Whip until the mixture has an almost whipped cream-like consistency, just firm enough to hold its shape but not over whipped so there aren't large air bubbles. Throw down a little smear on the bottom of your cake stand to act as sort of glue. Retrieve the less attractive of the 2 cake rounds and place it in the center of your cake stand. Now this cake baked up with a sort of concave top to it, which I'm going to lean into, generously spreading whipped cream on top and using its sort of bowl-like form factor to hold the strawberry jam in place. Once you got the center layer as loaded up as possible, top it up with the other cake round, and then my Achilles heel, cake decoration. I've got a star-shaped tip here that I'm just going to use to dot the entire surface of the cake, which is going to act as a bed for some strategic strawberries. Place those in the decorative pattern of your choice that won't be too difficult to cut around, and there you have it, a classic Victoria sponge cake in the jam sandwich configuration. Let's cut ourselves a slice. Unfortunately, it looks like my whipped cream got a little smooshed, but no matter, let's see how it tastes. And upgraded strawberry shortcake is an apt way to describe this. The cake has a delicate, open, almost cornbread-like texture. Maybe not my favorite cake, but certainly the easiest. So how do we make such a simple cake worthy of a Roy family wedding? And my first thought was the most expensive or specialty iteration of each ingredient. First, some non-homogenized raw milk from a raw certified dairy farm in the North Fork of Long Island, vertically grown Oishi strawberries, clocking in at $1 to $2 per berry, Poisson-Bon sugar, a bag of which runs about $35 plus shipping and handling, beurre Baudier, a French butter that'll run you about $12 for this little stick, some milled to order white llamas cake flour, coming in at $8 a pound, quail eggs, because they're the fanciest eggs I could think of or get my hands on, and some wild foraged Columbia vanilla beans, 3 of which will run you about $50. Now I thought it'd be interesting to follow almost exactly the same method for making the cake, albeit with much more expensive ingredients. First I'm sifting the sugar, which is incredibly fine but comes out of the bag very rocky, followed by the flour, baking powder, and salt, which I'm going to whisk to combine before adding the wet stuff. First up, 36 quail eggs, each of which must be painstakingly cracked, but if you want to make a tomlet, you gotta break some Greggs. Since these are so small, I'm beating these guys together before adding them to the party, along with the vanilla extract and roughly $35 worth of room temperature butter. These guys are getting gently beaten together, same deal as before, until it forms a smooth, noticeably darker batter, I think because of the cane sugar and the very high yolk to white ratio of quail eggs. These are getting the same treatment, smoothed, swirled, and stomped, and baked for the same amount of time in the same make and model of oven, until they spring spring back when poked, or they register 200 degrees Fahrenheit at their thickest point. Now we gotta make the whipped cream. First, we have to harvest the heavy cream from the unhomogenized milk, which we're gonna let sit undisturbed in the fridge overnight. I should say, for your safety, you should not consume raw milk. Next up, the most expensive strawberry jam of all time. About 600 grams or $80 worth of Oishi strawberries, combined with 440 grams of our fancy sugar and allowed to macerate for 30 minutes before simmering gently with the juice of one lemon. I couldn't find any fancy lemons, for 1 to 1.5 hours, during which time I lost track of the heat for about 2 minutes and managed to thoroughly scorch the jam. So after a few deep breaths and trying in vain to forgive myself, I popped open another 6 boxes of Oishi strawberries. I managed to make a batch that gelled and that I hadn't burned. The next day we have our specifically undisturbed milk, atop which you can kind of see the heavy cream has risen. So I'm going to carefully skim that off, and as I'm recording this I realize that's why they call it skim milk, before making the whipped cream, to which you might notice I'm adding 450 grams of mascarpone cheese, and to the 125 grams of sifted powdered sugar I'm adding 1.5 teaspoons of whipped cream stabilizer, before cutting and scraping my wild forged vanilla beans, scooping the pod's contents into the bowl. We're beating that all together with a wire whisk until it's smooth, scraping down the sides of the bowl, then adding our 600 grams of hand-harvested heavy cream, slowly at first and stopping to scrape down the sides of the bowl if things get too chunky, and the mascarpone cheese and the optional whipped cream stabilizer is going to make a much more frosting-like whipped cream, lending structural integrity to our cake, which as you can see I'm trimming because it's slightly uneven, laying down a little bit of whipped cream to act as glue, and placing the cake cut side down. Then to contain my jam, I'm first going to lay down a thin layer of whipped cream, piping a ring of whipped cream around the side so that it can act as a sort of above ground pool. Then I'm filling this void with the Oishi strawberry jam, which I think I cooked a little bit longer than the batch for the first cake, giving it a more stable and gelled consistency. On top of that goes our second cake, and I wasn't sure how to frost this one fancier, so I decided to cover the whole thing evenly with whipped cream, and then using a bench scraper scraped off the sides, giving it the trendy naked cake look, which is also admittedly much easier. Then on top I wanted to do a sort of stacked crescent moon of decoration. So first I dotted one side of the cake with rosettes of decreasing height, then arranged that with quartered and halved strawberries and what I hope were edible flowers. Probably just take those off before I serve, and there you have it, the fancified Victoria sponge. Total cost of production about $220, $300 if you count my batch of burnt jam. But will that cost be reflected in the quality of the cake? And the answer is, not really. The cake had a slightly more tender texture, I think just because I sifted together the dry stuff first, but other than that, it was a dead ringer. So I can think of only one fitting way to say farewell to one of the best TV shows of all time, and that is a meal fit for a king. Bread butts, milk, a whole egg, shell included, many generous dashes of hot sauce, a gob of expired Branston pickle, and on the table there was also Heinz beans and various salad dressings. I had to skip Siobhan's spit because I didn't have any on hand. I didn't think it would make an appreciable difference in the final product. Blended until relatively smooth, and let's give it a taste. Jeremy Strong apparently actually chugged this mixture, so in solidarity I'm going to give this an actual taste. And by virtue of all the acid from the pickles, salad dressing, and hot sauce, and the little bits of bread and eggshell, it has both the flavor and texture of puke. I can think of only one fitting use for this stuff: to be worn as a crown. And I'm not sure if my head is big or my blender is small or both, but try as I might, I couldn't get it to rest on my dome. Oh well, so long Succession, and long live the king.